Before we get into today's game, I want to talk about the sponsors for my channel. Card Conduit is the best way to sell your unused Magic cards. Whether you've got a box of unsorted bulk, or a complete and alphabetized set, there's a great option for everyone. With a payout averaging 19% better than using any one buy list, and that's after fees are applied, you can rest assured you'll get the best bang for your buck. And if you use the affiliate link in the description below, or the promo code MTGMUDSTA, you'll save 10% off their fees. And 401 Games, Canada's one-stop shop for trading cards, board games, and hobby supplies. And if you use the promo code MTGMUDSTA, your first purchase of MTG Sealed and Singles will be 5% off. And Dragon Shield, the strongest sleeves for your strongest deck. So be sure to use the code MUDSTA or the affiliate link down below to save 5% on your next order. Today's patron shoutout goes to Andrew Harala. Thanks Andrew for your continued support through Patreon. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game finds Corwin, Charles, and Nick rejoining me, with Corwin playing his Reaper King deck. He keeps Inga and Essica, Swamp, Steam Vents, Taurian Mauler, Morphic Pool, Universal Automaton, and Spire Garden. Charles is playing his Chulane Group Hug deck with a 1000-Year Elixir, a Temple Bell, an Island, Show and Tell, Council's Judgment, and 2 Plains. I have recently sleeved up a Marvin deck, keeping Buried Ruin, Prismatic Lens, Endbringer, Pristine Talisman, Palladium Mirror, the Grey Havens, and a Jewelworks Mole. Nick is playing his Myrel deck, keeping a Valiant Veteran, Aven Riftwatcher, Fey Steed, Glorious Anthem, Labyrinth of Scophos, and 2 Plains. Corwin wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a tap Steam Vents. Charles just plays an Island. I play the Grey Havens, scrying 1 and passing. Nick draws and plays a Labyrinth of Scophos. Corwin's turn has him drawing and playing another tapped Shockland with a Breeding Pool. Charles plays a Plains and casts Arcane Signet. I play a Buried Ruin and then pay 2 for a Prismatic Lens. Nick's turn has him playing a Plains and casting a Valiant Veteran. Corwin draws, plays a Spire Garden, and casts a Taurian Mauler. He passes after it resolves. Charles' turn has him playing a Plains and paying 3 for a Temple Bell. I draw and cast Marvin, and then follow up with Drillworks Mole and pass. Nick's got another Plains for turn, and he casts a Glorious Anthem. He then swings a Valiant Veteran at Charles for 3 and passes. Corwin's turn has him playing a Command Tower, and he brings out Inga and Essica. He then goes to combat and swings the Mauler at me for 6 as it's been pumped from the other spells being cast. Post-combat, Corwin taps the Mauler to cast a Universal Automaton. He then passes, and during his end step, Charles activates Temple Bell, so we each draw a card. Charles draws for turn and activates the bell again, and we all draw another card. He then plays a Haunted Phantasm, giving Nick the 5 Goblin tokens. Charles then plays a tapped Lungbrain Falls and passes to me. I play a Forge of Heroes for turn, and then cast a Palladium Mirror. Marvin gets its activated abilities, so I tap Marvin and the Prismatic Lens for 3, and use one of it to help cast Manifold Key. I use another one floating to untap Marvin, and then tap him again so I'm able to help cast Pristine Talisman. With nothing else, I pass. Nick's got a Plains for turn, and then casts a Fairground Warden. He uses it to exile the Taurian Mauler, and he then casts Soul Warden. Going to combat, Nick then swings the Valiant Veteran at me, and 5 Goblins at Corwin. Corwin blocks one of them with Inga and Essica, and I take 3, and Corwin takes 8. Nick then passes after that. Corwin draws and casts 3 visits, going to find a forest. He then plays a Morphic Pool, and he casts a Chameleon Colossus. He follows up with a Priest of Titania, and passes. Charles' turn has him drawing and playing a forest, and he then casts Edric. Going to combat, Charles swings the Haunted Phantasm at Nick, and Nick takes 4, with Charles drawing a card. He passes after that. I draw and play a Darksteel Citadel, and then have enough mana to cast a Hedron Archive. I follow it up by casting an Endbringer, and I pass to Nick after that. Nick just draws, casts Myrel, and passes to Corwin. Corwin's turn has him casting his commander, the Reaper King, and then Atla Palani. I respond by tapping Marvin to kill the priest, and Corwin then continues by playing a swamp for turn and casting Graveshifter. Since the Graveshifter has Changeling, it's also a Scarecrow, so the Reaper King destroys the Fairground Warden, which returns the Taurian Mauler, and as it enters, it destroys the Soul Warden. The Graveshifter then returns Priest of Titania to Corwin's hand as well. He then passes, and once more during his end step, Charles activates the Temple Bell to draw everyone a card. Charles draws for turn, and he plays a Forest, and then goes to combat. He swings the Haunted Phantasm at Nick again for 4, and gets to draw a card from Edric. His second main phase then has a Fairy Artisans coming in, and to save on time I'm not going to narrate every time something comes in. I play a War Room as my land for turn, and then activate the Endbringer to draw a card with it, and after drawing it, I then cast a Gilded Lotus, and I pass to Nick. I untap my Endbringer with Nick, and Nick draws, and casts a Ballynock Cohort, and then plays a Gavany Trapper. Going to combat, Nick swings Myrel and his goblins at Charles, making 4 soldier tokens for Myrel attacking. Charles' copy of the Gavany Trapper from the Fairy Artisan blocks Myrel, but he does take the rest, and with nothing else, Nick passes. Corwin draws and plays an island for turn. He then casts Sakashima the Imposter. With the clone on the stack, I activate the War Room in response to draw a card, but with no answer found, Sakashima then enters as a copy of the Reaper King. Corwin then targets the Endbringer with the Reaper King trigger as it enters. I then activate it to draw a card in response, and it gets destroyed. Corwin then plays an Arcane Signet, and then recasts the Priest of Titania. Going to combat, Corwin swings the Universal Automaton, Chameleon Colossus, and the real Reaper King at Nick, and the Graveshifter and Taurian Mauler go at me. Nick chumps the Colossus and the Reaper King with 2 soldier tokens, but I declare no blocks. Corwin then draws 3 cards from Edric. He then follows up by casting a Sliver Hivelord. Once that's out, he follows up with Mirror Entity. The Reaper King destroys the 1000-Year Elixir and his own Universal Automaton, and with the trigger targeting the automaton on the stack, Charles activates Temple Bell in response. We all draw a card, and with the automaton being destroyed and it's an egg, Atla Palani triggers, and Corwin reveals until a Drum Bellower, putting it to field, and then passing turn. Charles draws, and casts a Council's Judgment. He chooses Atla Palani, and I choose Atla as well, with Nick choosing Atla for the 3rd time. She gets exiled, and Charles then casts Bribery, and targets Corwin. He goes into his library, and brings up Moriette of the Frost, which comes in as a copy of the Fairy Artisans. Going to combat, Charles swings the Haunted Phantasm and Fairy Artisans at Nick, as he's made a deal with Corwin earlier to save his Phantasm for the Reaper King. Nick takes 6, and Charles draws 2, and he passes after that. I draw and play Abstergo Entertainment, and once it's out, cast Pilipala. I'm able to make infinite mana off of Marvin from tapping him for 2, and then paying the 2 to untap him for 1 mana with the Pilipala trigger, which I then use to cast a Thran Dynamo. I then cast an Honor Warden Shaku. With my infinite mana, I also have infinite untaps, and I make Marvin get infinite counters with Drillworks Mold ability. I then sacrifice my Buried Ruin to return Hedron Archive to my hand. I then recast it and crack it, drawing 2 cards. I cast an Amaranthian Wall, and once it's out, I use the Manifold Key to make Marvin unblockable, and I go to combat. I swing Marvin at Corwin to take him out, drawing a card off of Edric. After combat, I get to make infinite mana again, and then cycle a Blasted Landscape. I then cast Scour from Existence, and target Myrel, taking her out, and I then leave Marvin untapped, and pass turn. Nick draws and casts Prava of the Steel Legion, and then goes to combat. He swings out at me, and I block the Valiant Veteran with Marvin, while the Wall and the Mole go in front of 2 goblins, but I take the rest. After blocks, Charles activates the Temple Bell, but I still take 16 after we all draw. Nick also gets to draw a bunch of cards from Edric, and he then plays a Plains, and follows up with the Bishop's Soldier, and passes to Charles. Charles draws and activates Temple Bell again, and then casts a Haunted Lamassu. He gives the horror to Nick, and goes to combat. He swings the Phantasm at me for 4, which I can't block, and he draws a card, and passes. I draw and play a land, and make infinite mana again, and cast Introductory to Prophecy. I then continue by playing and then sacrificing Dreamstone Hedron to draw 3 cards. I then activate and exile Abstergo Entertainment, returning the Dreamstone Hedron to my hand, and exiling all graveyards. I then recast the Hedron, and then sacrifice it to draw 3 more. I then make Marvin unblockable thanks to the Manifold key. Going to combat, I take Nick out with Marvin, and draw off of Edric. The card I draw is a Gruesome Slaughter, which I then cast and untap Marvin infinitely, and then tap Marvin using the Gruesome Slaughter ability to take his creatures out. I follow up with a Chariot of Victory, Heartstone, and then a Foundry Inspector, and pass. Charles draws and cycles a Dismantling Wave, and I respond by making Marvin and the Amaranthian Wall indestructible. The rest of my artifacts get wiped away, and Charles then manages to find a chump blocker with Birds of Paradise. He passes after that. I draw for turn and play a Mystifying Maze, and then cast the card I just drew with the Triskelion. This is the perfect answer for the board state, as I remove 1 counter from Marvin to ping the birds, and then swing in with Marvin to win the game through commander damage. Game review time. This game was about 1 hour and 7 minutes and change, although about 5 minutes of that was unfortunately due to an audio error that it took me having to fix on the fly. Never something I want to do, but it's kind of part and parcel with making content. The game itself was really kind of cool. Unfortunately, I think Nick's deck was a little bit underpowered compared to the rest of them. It seemed like a lot of uncommon and common soldiers just to sort of work around Myrel, and Anthem effects, which, I mean, the Anthem effects were pretty good. It turned all those 1/1 goblins into 2/2s, so he was smashing for about 10 on average, which is pretty spicy, but outside of that, it didn't seem like he was getting much done. Corwin, on the other hand, had the opposite problem. It seemed like he had too many things to do, too many cards, so many synergies, and yes, we did capture later on the Sliver Hive Lord, making the Universal Automaton indestructible, but it was a sequencing issue. All he had to have done was cast the Mirror Entity first. He could have gotten the trigger, he could have blown stuff up. We didn't think it was a big deal, so we didn't bother rewinding it and redoing it. Other than that, the early Taurian Mauler is always kind of scary because it gets so big so quickly. And yeah, I didn't narrate every single +1/+1 counter because it just felt like it would stretch out the game too long. Unfortunately for Charles, his Chulane deck didn't even cast Chulane, and despite the fact that it's built around Group Hug as a mechanic, I think the only card we saw that really did that was the Temple Bell. He drew us a couple cards, which is great, but outside of that, it just felt like a couple things were too late or he didn't have enough mana. The Dismantling Wave would have been brutal against my deck, but I already had that wall out that gave Marvin indestructible. This was the first time I played Marvin, and it performed exceptionally well. There's a lot of ways that you can just abuse his ability to copy activated abilities, and as you saw, it just kind of got out of hand. It was kind of funny that I was able to get basically Marvin to be as big as I wanted him to, and the only thing that was basically preventing me from winning the game was I didn't have anything to do with that, outside of being able to use Manifold Key to basically connect Marvin to someone's face and take them out. I did draw the Triskelion, but unfortunately it was only when I had 1 opponent left, so it really didn't matter that much. Otherwise, the deck's pretty sweet. I've got a lot of things that I want to put in, try out. A lot of artifacts that turn non-creature artifacts into creature artifacts that Marvin can copy their abilities, and just other fun niche cards. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.